you, just like how the standard is being translated to different natural human languages, I want it also to be translated to programming languages. So people to really are really pressing on this idea of this is not a exclusive to .NET or C Sharp. You know, you don't really have to be in the .NET or C Sharp world in order for you to kind of, you know, be able to develop standard compliant systems, right? So anyway, let's see here. So last time, I think the code is merged. The API for adding source, is that merged? Did that go in?
Yeah, that went in.
Okay, that's
Um,
fine. What I want
uh,
to do now is I want to discuss with you the
oh,
same
so
thing that you and I, huh?
your branch is still there, and that's up to date. So we can just continue on that branch.
On that
And
branch, particular
yeah,
branch, even though we merged the PR. Okay, so let's do this. So I'm gonna go back to you know, oh, there he is. Hey, Greg.
hello, hello.
Yeah, Greg Mike is out. Let's see here if I can kind of just start over. Here we go. Excuse me. Let's see here. Okay, so get file core, get file core API.
It helps when you turn your headphone on.
Your headphone on? That's kind of helpful. I agree.
How's it going, guys?
Good.
Yeah,
Hey
good,
man,
good.
how are you doing?
Good, good. I was just about getting ready to go out, and then I saw
The
your
message?
yeah. I was like, I was here at 9, then I waited till 10, and I was like, somebody slept in.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the delay. The plan was to go to the, we have a park over here, and I got this little nice drone, and I wanted to go there and just do it, but oh, you have to have, registration this and training that. You can't just get a toy and fly it in the air.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
have
You have to
to.
go through the FAA.
Yep. And you
Yeah,
have to get an AMA, and you have to get a club registration, and oh my God, like four
yeah.
things you have to go through. But anyway, it's fun
Yep.
nonetheless. Like I enjoyed like how they made it in a way where you wear the VR AR goggles, and it just tracks with your head movement. So the camera goes with your head. I thought that was pretty wild.
Yeah,
I gotta show you guys this. This is like one of the wildest things. Like, how do you even? I love the idea that you can just simply, like, you are the drone. So the drone is basically wherever you turn your head, it's following you. I thought that was pretty cool. That was pretty wild. Here
yeah.
it is. Here's a quick video of what it does. So so I was trying this. Now watch my head movement and watch what it's doing as I move my head. Watch this. See? And look, the camera looks up and down as I look up and down. So how cool is that? That's
Yeah,
wild. That's amazing.
yeah. It is. It's
Got a lot of
unreal.
nice toys lately.
I don't even know, like, I was just talking to someone about this. I was saying, like, kids these days, the kind of toys they have, like, as far as we could go, an amazing toy would be a stick. You sit with a stick in a yard and you get to play outside. That's your toy, right? But now, oh man, the just just the expansion of things completely crazy, and it's exciting nonetheless. It's really exciting. Anyway, now that we have like 16 people, watching us, we should probably talk about some software. What do you guys think? Let's talk about that. So, thank you both for joining in, and thanks for everyone watching us. This is another session where we get to build software that we will use. Like, they basically call it in the tech industry eating your own dog food, right? That's meaning using the systems that you develop for yourself. Where we stopped is developing API controllers, and then we thought to ourselves, how do we test drive the capacity or capability of making sure a controller is doing its job? Like, is the controller actually doing what it's supposed to, in terms of mapping particular exceptions, categorical or localized exceptions to the right errors, right? So for instance, and bear with me if you already know some of these things, for the people watching, I always assume that you know nothing. You've never watched any of my videos or any of our sessions before. Like assume for instance, like you're throwing a not found student exception, right? And that guy wrapped up in a student validation exception, right? So when your controller receives this guy, it will try to unwrap it and look for this guy specifically. And then based on that, it should return not found, right, with the exception message that you are sending to this person. We care a lot about this, right? Because it's important, when you send the proper status codes with the right HTTP methods, your consumer will also know what to expect. The last thing you want to do is to return 200 and your body has an error in there that says internal server error. That's you're returning 200, okay, but what actually happened is that your server, not that this ever happens in real life, this is all fictitious hypotheticals. Nobody does this. Who would do this, right, Christo, Greg? No, nobody does this at all.
Yep.
So so we ran into a problem. Obviously, when you're trying to push the wheel of innovation forward, you're gonna run into blockers, right? And one of the blockers that we had is that you can't just go like this and say, let me show you. You can't just go and validate an action result to an action result, because action results is a very complex kind of object. I want to make sure people watching are able to see the text. If you're not, please let us know in the chat and we'd be more than happy to increase the font. I think I'm at 200% at this moment. So let's do this. In the unit test, I'm going to create a new folder, right? So this is controllers post. I think I'm on the same branch that you were talking about, Christo. And then I'm going to create a
Yeah.
folder. And this,
Have you got latest on that? I updated main
I did. I
yeah,
didn't get main. I got just the,
just from the repo. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
So,
Hey,
okay. So,
hey guys, I just pushed a code rub for the namespace on the controllers.
okay. That's fine.
Yeah.
We're gonna merge with main. Does it make sense that I just pull straight from main and create an, maybe I should do that. And maybe that's an idea for everyone just to see, what I'm doing. So,
Mm.
okay. Ahmed says hello. Hello, Ahmed. Nice to meet you. Let's get back to main, because a lot of people will ask this question, be like, okay, I already have controllers in place. What should I do? Right? Like, how do I re-add these unit tests? Well, okay, then let's create a new branch. I'm gonna call it users, Hassan, Habib. And because you're writing about more than 3 unit tests, I'm gonna call it medium controllers. So that's the new kind of categorization that we have. And then sources, and then the action, which is post. So I just created a new branch. The branch is down here. And then I'm going to create a new folder in here, and I'm going to call it controllers. Here we go. Right? Why is this guy error? Oh, that's infrastructure. I don't care about this guy, not just yet. So let me revert on this guy. Undo changes here. Yeah, I don't want to touch this guy. The guy I care about is this unit test, and then I'm gonna go and say, well, you have a bunch of files, right, for every controller. So I'm just gonna go ahead here and say this is the sources controller, and then inside of that, I'm gonna go and say sources controller tests.cs. Most of the other things are very similar to what we've done before, and you'll see that very clearly. Like, for instance, I'm going to do a public partial in here. I'm going to say private, hold on, private read only let's mock this first. So I can do an I source service. So the service itself, source service mock. So I'm mocking the service because the service is the dependency of my controller. So let's do that. right? I don't know. I used to say mock, but then you have an interface. Why don't you use it, right? I think that's okay, Christo, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Right. Uh, and then I also want the controller itself that I'm working with. So private, read only, and then sources controller. So that's your sources controller right here. And then let's do a constructor, this dot sources service mock equal a new mock sources service. And then in here, I want to say, here's my controller, equal new sources controller with the mock, with the object. Everything is good and dandy. I'm just going to add in here just the parameter. So far, so good. Looks great. Maybe we need a filler to pass in a source. So I'll just go here and say private static filler and then source. And then I say create source filler like that. And this guy will basically just do a source filler. I don't know if we have a created date, updated date that would require.
We can
Yeah,
nick
we
the
do.
filler from we can
We
nick the
do.
filler from the unit test for the foundation service.
Yeah, I could steal it from there, right? So I could go into sources, this guy, and I could just copy that from here. That would work. But this guy, yeah, let's see. I don't want to care much for passing in a date time. I want to
Mm.
keep it simple, right? But I could do it super quick. It's basically just going and saying, here is a var filler equal new filler, because this is a much minimized version of the whole thing, right? Filler setup, right? And then we go and say on type date time offset, right? That's the type that we go and use, and then say use create get random date time offset, and it just generates the method. And here's my method right here. And it doesn't even matter like what kind, like is it in the future, is it in the past? It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. So new date time range, and then earliest date, new date time, get value. We're all set. And then go back here and say return the filler. I don't know. Did this guy did this guy already have enumerables? Oh, it has contributions and repositories. And if you don't intentionally ignore these, it becomes a problem. So I'm gonna go here and say this. Ignore, let's see, on property, right? And on this property, I want to go and say contributions. And I just want to say ignore. And also on property, source.repository, ignore it. See how AI is going wild with me. Like if you're going fast, it's going with you. Hey Rahimuddin. Ahmed says, when do you decide to use processing service on top of a foundation? If you have non-primitive operations. For instance, a foundation service will do CRUD operations, add, retrieve, modify, stuff like that, right? But if you have to do something like upsert, for instance, which is a combination of two primitive operations, then you definitely need a processing service, right? More than just a primitive operation, something above and beyond. Like when you go and say verify student exists, that's a higher order business logic because it means something else. Or when you say mark student as active, right? Or mark document as expired, right? So the language of it is a lot more involved. Whether it combines a multiple primitive operations or not. But I always try to simplify it for people and say processing services is an orchestration of multiple primitive operations for the same entity. Usually it is. But sometimes it's also just a pass through to balance the architecture. Okay, staying here, this is a source. I want to create a source. So this is private, again, private static source, create random source, right? And this guy will basically just do this. Fantastic. Okay, now let's write a test. We're going to write a test for a controller, which is going to be very interesting, something that we haven't necessarily done before, but thanks to Christo and others, they've done their experimentation, so we can probably do it, right? So this is logic.posts. Okay, so we're going to do it this way, and then we're going to write a test in here. So here's a test. Here's a fact. Public async task should return created on post async. So given, when, then, like that, and then I'm gonna go and say source, random source. You want to make sure that the source that is coming back is actually the source, right? So source, and this is added source, like that, and this comes from input source, and then the last thing is expected source from added source. And then I want a deep clone on that guy to dereference things, to make sure nothing happened in the controller itself, right? Let's take a quick question. Three body problems. If my controller have authorization and authentication, how that affect? It doesn't. It does not, because you're accessing the class directly, so it won't affect your unit tests. But it most certainly will affect your acceptances, and that's something we need to talk about when it comes to security, which Christo only asked me about like 20 times. I keep saying, yeah, sure, let's do it. There's a brilliant way though to bypass, since you are in the same module, in the same binary. There's a brilliant way to do it. We'll talk about it in a second. But I also, in here, I want to create something else. I want to create a object result, right? And that object result is the expected object result. So this guy here, expected object result, right? And that object result needs to have particular things in it. The piece that we expect here is actually more like created object result. Okay, so the created object result, if you go internally in this guy, you will find that it has this 200, 201 kind of value in it, right? But this is not the end of the story. I want to go here and say, well, here's my service mock setup like that. Where's my source service mock? That's funny. Is it because of the interface? Yeah, because of the interface. That's right. So let's do that setup. There you go. And then service dot add source async input source. When you're passing that source specifically, returns async added source. Great. And then in here, here's where it gets interesting. You have this action result, right? This action result has the source for post source. So you can't just create, an like in here, you're basically, this action result is the one that carries, that value, that response. So when you call your controller here, you're basically going and saying, oh, it's created, and that value that's coming back is created object result. That's what came back inside of that action result that you just passed. Watch this. So this expected object result is part of another thing called expected action result, right? And this guy will say action result of source expected object result, that guy right here. Okay, and because you're saying this has to be created, watch this. If you go and say actual action result like this, watch this, should be equivalent to expected action result, you're going to think everything is good and dandy. Like if I run this test, let's take a look. You're going to think it is good and dandy, but it's not. And this is just, there's an advice there for people, but I'll come back to this in a second. I want to show you first, like see what I'm saying is true before you actually so here's my test. No, it actually failed. Let's see why it failed. So this guy's saying, no, this is the services. This is different. I'm trying to run the controller side of it. This foundations, sources. Yeah, here, watch this guy. So this guy is passing. It must be correct, Christo, right? Like if I have this guy passing like that, it must be right. Should we just wrap it up and go home? Does this do the trick? What do you think?
Um,
Huh.
We've not done the VNOs at the bottom, and do we need to compare the status code still?
Right. So we need to know the status codes. But here's the crazy part that I notice about this actual action result stuff. If you go into your post, let's change this to bad request object result like that. Let's just say that this is my object right here. If I go and run this guy, let's see what happens. It passed. Why did it pass? Right? Because this action result should be equivalent to expected. I think it's a deferred for execution, and it's much more complex underneath. Like if you go inside that action result, it's a sealed class that doesn't have any meaningful properties to us. Like look, it has a result that's a nullable and a value that's also a nullable undefined type. So it doesn't work, basically. But if you go back, we had to kind of add something to RESTful sense to say should be equivalent as one word, just following your footsteps as what you did with exceptions, right? So now if I try to pull this, I will need RESTful sense 311, right? So I'm gonna go into NuGet packages here and say RESTful sense 3.1, sorry, not 3.11, 3.1. This is just something I released, a couple of nights ago, maybe last night. So now if I have this and I pull this guy here, I think the conversation will be much different. I'll tell you why. If I run this situation here now, let's see what happens. Here we go. Now it's failing. And look at the failure message. The failure message says expected to be 400 but found 201. Even better, you see how this expected source is deep cloned, right? I will go, instead of that expected source, right? I will go and change the ID on that, right? So I'm gonna go here and say added source.id. Actually, let me fix this one first. So this here is created object result like that, right? So now if I run my tests, that guy should pass. Right? So that means it actually is comparing status codes. So I care about the status code, but I also care about something else, which is the actual object that's coming back from the controller. So if I go here and say add source since ID referenced expected, and I said here's a GUID.new GUID like that, and I try to run this, watch what happens. It failed. Did it fail for the right reason though? Yeah, it says, hey, the property root value ID expected it to be this. It will even tell you at the lowest level what specifically in these properties don't make sense. How cool is that? It's pretty cool. It's an upgrade, right? But this is not the end of the story. Well, first of all, I'm sorry, were you going to say something, Greg or Christo?
No.
Good. Okay. This is a huge upgrade for us because now we can actually go and say, I want you to intentionally actively think about what you're returning when a particular exception happens. I can't tell you how many times I caught problems because there's no coverage for this area. It's like a blind spot. Acceptance tests care about components talking to each other. Unit test is making sure that every proper exception is thrown. But what is handling this slightly business logic-y area in our controllers? That's where this becomes interesting.
So in the unit tests for the controllers, we'd be writing an individual test for each
correct.
return value from the.
Correct.
Be a
But there's
lot
no
of
logic. Like
yeah,
this is
yeah. It's very simple. It's very
simple.
Yeah, it's very much like doing the geez, top of my head here, like what I did with
Hmm.
the mock tests for.
Yes,
They're very similar.
correct. Right.
Yep.
But this is not the end of the road, gentlemen. There's more to it than that. Like, okay, this is great. This is if I run this test, it will verify the service was called once, the controller isn't doing anything shady, and we're really covered. Because right now, if I go into your controller and call the same service 50 million times, nothing is going to say something is wrong. Absolutely nothing, right? So here's where it gets more interesting. So this is all great as long as you're in the happy path. But when you get into the sad path, things get a little bit more interesting because RESTful sense doesn't really build a particular, it builds problem details
Mm.
within that object, right? So we have two options. Let me just kind of present the problem. I will commit this as a pass, and then I'll present the problem here. So this is a pass. Great, fantastic. This looks wonderful. But here's the second problem that we have. I'm gonna go and take a copy of this guy, and I'm gonna paste here, and I'm gonna say this is exceptions, right? Exception.posts. So this is logic.posts, and this is exceptions.posts. Okay. Let's talk about this guy. Starting back from the top, because I really want people kind of to get used to the building, not the copying of code, should return, right? Not found. Sorry, should return bad request on post if validation error occurred. Async. Did I call the other one async as well? I hope so. I feel like I didn't. Let's see. Yeah, I did. Good. Good job. So here's where it gets a little interesting. So I can go here and say given when then, and here's some source. So some source, we don't care where it is. We just want to create an exception. We're going to create trouble, right? And then I'm going to go here and say source validation exception. Okay, so new source validation exception. Great. That guy takes what? Takes a message and an exception. Sure. We're going to give it a message and we're going to give it an exception. So it wants an exception of kind, an inner exception. It wants an inner exception of whatever type, and we don't care too. We just want some inner exception. So some inner exception. For this particular case, we don't care, but there will be cases where we actually care a lot. So this is an exception, and I'm gonna take that some inner exception and put it right into this inner exception parameter. And then in here, I say source validation error occurred, fix the errors and try again. Sure. We might have found a new reason to have these without inserting parameters, but we'll come back to that part. Okay, so I want to cause trouble. So this .mock .setup, and here's my service, service.add source async. It is any source. And then when that happens, go ahead and throw asynchronously a source validation exception. So far, so good, very straightforward, no problem. But what's the expectation here? If you go here and say expected bad request action result, bad request object result, and you put the exception in there, watch what's going to happen. This is where it gets very, very hairy. Here, same thing, right? I'm saying action result in here. The good news about this is that you don't say assert throws because it will always return an object out of that
Mm.
controller, right? Now, whether it's the
That,
right object or not, huh?
that line 38, does it not need the dot inner exception?
Which one?
Line 38.
Line 38 in here?
Yeah, after the
Sure, sure.
yeah.
Let's do this. Here's the inner exception. Sounds good. Yeah, no problem. It still doesn't solve the upcoming problem, and I'll tell you why, but let's just do this for now here. This is what's called times once. We don't do any logging. We don't do anything. We already have the service that did that for us. So I'm just going to verify no other calls. Now here comes the fireworks. Let's run this. It failed. Even though it's the right thing, it still failed. I wonder why. Watch the error message in here. It says, hey, you have target site, you have message, you have data, you have inner exception, you have help link, you have source, you have each result, you have stack trace, you have all that craziness, right? That RESTful Sense constructs for you, right? In real time. How do we solve that problem? Take a wild guess. Some people would say, oh, then I need to actually build all of that in here. Like I need to actually go here and actually build every single one of these in a model state dictionary, and it just gets really ugly really fast. What do you guys suggest? See, it's I could have just showed you the first one and sent everyone home, and I said it works, right? But I'm not drumming up business here. Have you ever seen Greg and Chris, have you ever seen people that go into carnivals from, like they put that in old movies, right? You know, you go there and he hires someone that drinks the power potion. And then that guy becomes so powerful, and then everyone just buys the potion. and,
Yeah.
No, we're not drumming up that business here. We're on YouTube. People know exactly who we are, so we can't just hop into the thing and
The,
just run
the,
the
pro-
wagon and just run
the,
away.
pro- the proverbial snake oil salesman.
Yes, exactly. So we can't do that, right? We have to actually. What do you
So,
think?
so my first thoughts is to use RESTful Sense for that, because then you don't have to have any knowledge about that building of that object.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree.
I would
Mm-hmm.
add a dependency to the unit test main file.
So you want to go here? Let's see. So the idea is 100%. So you just kind of call RESTful Sense here using RESTful Sense like that. Dot controllers.
Yeah, and then it'll be on line 19 a private read only RESTful Sense controller.
Private read only RESTful Sense controller like that.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Let's see. RESTful controller. Yeah, it's called RESTful controller. Mm-hmm.
And then you just
You just initialize it. Okay.
Yeah.
This dot RESTful controller equals new, like that.
Yeah, and then in the test.
In the test, you just call the function and create it, right? So in here, you basically go and say, instead of doing that, I'm just gonna go here and say this dot RESTful controller dot bad request, and just you pass in the inner exception like that.
Yeah.
Does this work? So that means that this guy is returning bad request object result.
Yeah. And do we need to wrap that again into the action results?
Oh, this guy?
Yeah, like we did on
to
the
build your
previous test.
expected? Absolutely. So we should basically go and say action result, right? Source, and then expected bad request. So that would be your action result, like that. Does that work?
That's what I've got in my mind.
Let's try it. And then there's some enhancement that we can do. It looks fun. It looks like it worked. Let's actually verify that it worked. Like if I took away that inner exception from here and run this guy, what will happen? It fails. Does it fail for the right reason? It says, yeah, you know, the title is different from the title, the length, everything is different, right? What if we change this to something like a bad gateway, right? So this guy's going to freak out because the model is different, but that's fine. gateway, bad gateway object result there. So if I run this again, it should also give me that. By the way, that's a beautiful solution, Christo, but there's a tiny thing that I would modify. I'll tell you in a sec.
Mm.
So here we go. This is, it says, hey, it looks like, oh, this is beautiful. You can't see the error here. Let me show you the error. The error here says, hey, your problem detail help link is different. Watch this. It says the help link is different. The status is different. The status code is different. Brilliant solution with a tiny bit of modification. I feel like engaging this guy at this test level is too much detail. What do you think if we went back here and basically did something like this? Watch. Private static object bad request object result create bad request object result, right, with some exception in there, and basically that guy will return whatever that is for you. So you're basically, I'm passing here, I'm not even going to say an exception or anything. I'm just going to say this is an object. I'm passing you an object in the most generic sense, because bad requests could come from many things, right? So here's this guy, and then I'm basically saying here's returning this, and take that object and put it here, and maybe fat arrow this whole thing because it's just a one-liner.
Should we value task that?
For this guy?
Yeah. With our new.
Yeah, sure, why not? No, I'm okay with that. So we could say async value task. I mean, for these non-abstract methods, we don't have to do that. It's the
Yeah.
abstraction at the interface level. That's where I care about. Like at this level, it's fine, right? But if you have an interface, that's where it becomes important. And then I can go here and basically say this, just take that guy and say create bad request object result. What do you think about that? Is that nicer? A little, maybe? Create bad request object result, and this is bad request object result, and we're happy. Everyone goes home. There's another solution.
Show me that bad request object result method again.
You bet. Here.
But we've not built the problem detail in that then.
Yeah, but because you're passing in the exception, the controller is doing that for you. Oh, sorry. No, you're right. This would be this dot. No, you're right. Sorry, that's a brain fart right there. So so here is this dot controller dot bad request, and then you're passing in the absolutely 100%. Great point, Christo. So now if I run this, it actually did fail. See, I was just gonna sell people on the snake oil and just walk away, but Christo caught us. Greg, we can't just run away.
So now we're not snake oil salesmen. We're used car salesmen.
We can't just run away with that. Okay, let's see why it's still failing though. So we propose this source validation exception that will have an inner exception with expected bad requests passed to the action result, create bad request object result. This is all good. So let's run this test one more time and see what happens. It doesn't like it. It says exception. Oh, I probably know why. Because in here, I have to actually spell it out that this is exception. And that's probably why. See, we're upgrading and we're learning, but then hundreds and hundreds of source code will be written the same way. I bet it's looking for the exception because there is no guarantee that the inner will always be the same type. That's right. Okay, let's run it this way. I think this one might work. I could be wrong. There you go. Here's a better solution, maybe better solution. Someone proposed this. I showed you this and you were like, where did you get that method from? This is not mine, right? And I don't have clearance from the person that came up with this kind of tell them to say their name out loud, but they inherited from RESTful controller, which is weird. And then it went all the way down here. And instead of doing all that, they basically just said bad request, because now they inherited from that. See, I have my kind of reservations about this approach, although it is brilliant nonetheless. Like you're basically saying, I need these methods, let's add them in. But it kind of, I don't know. What do you guys think about this? I've been waiting this whole week just to kind of sit here at this moment in time and say, what do you think about it? It looks elegant. Don't get me wrong. You don't have to build these new methods. You don't have to new up. Like look how much you have to get rid of. So extra code that you don't have to worry about. All of this goes away. All of this goes away.
Yeah, it's kind of what I played with.
That's what
But
what you tried to do. Mm-hmm.
Well, no, I was playing with it, but I only got as far as the logic on the
Mm-hmm.
post, and that's kind of where I ended up, was using inheriting restful sense.
So we have these two options. I think what Christo proposed is brilliant. I think this is brilliant. Yep. I want to just know, and people watching us, please feel free to kind of vote in, because this is how standard 211, this is what the standard 211 is. It's about test driving controllers.
I quite like this approach because you don't think RESTful sense is another dependency in your. You might look at that this .restful controller and think you need to do a VNO on it. I like the syntax more.
Okay, we have one vote. What do you think, Greg? Which direction should we take?
What vote are you voting for there, Christo? Snake oil or used car sales?
Car sales. Hondas, used Hondas that only God knows what happened in them before they get sold.
I mean, are you saying that inheriting the restful sense and not doing all the dependency is your vote?
Yeah, I think
inheriting. I mean, I kind of looked at it as the controller's already got restful sense inheriting from it. So I was like, well, why not have it do it on the sources controller test as well? So yeah, so that's my vote too.
So that's your vote too? Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good then. I guess that's how we're gonna do it. You know, I'm okay with it. I don't have any particular issue with it. I think it saves a lot of, you know, and you know who you are, you know, your name starts with a B, you know, thank you very much. This is your idea. You know, I'll let you. Yeah,
wonder who that could be.
Yeah, I wonder who that is. You know, starts with a B. You know, Three Body Problem says that's just someone watching us. I don't know. They chose their name. The inheritance looks elegant. Not sure if it add too much methods that may tempt the developer to use some things that should not. See, it says you're gonna tempt the user, the developer, engineers, to use more methods. Now you're kind of opening the door with that pattern to. It's like, here's the thing. Here's the one thing that kind of stopped me when I looked at this. When we test our methods, just think about it for a second. When we test our methods, do we inherit from anything? We don't. No. We don't inherit from anything, right? So now you're kind of switching your pattern really quick. That's a very good argument, by the way. Like you're basically saying, oh, sometimes inherit and sometimes don't. It's weird.
But wouldn't that fall kind of out of our, you know, from the service tests over to controller tests, where controllers are really interacting with restful sense for the most part.
Interesting. I mean, Greg, we do the same thing with acceptance tests. In acceptance tests, we don't have acceptance tests here yet, but with acceptance tests, you inherit. There's this other argument. Ahmed says the source controller also inherits. Yes, it does. It inherits from RESTful controller. If yes, then this is so much better. That's another opinion. Be like, well, you're doing the same thing. You're testing a controller, and
Yep.
sources controller inherits from RESTful controller. Why don't you do it
Yep.
this way?
And it's forcing people when they're writing these tests to actually go and learn what RESTful controller does.
It is. It is. That
Yep.
I didn't think about it even this way. Like, go and learn what this controller actually is doing for you, because it's doing a lot. You
Yeah.
know this more than anyone, Greg. But yeah,
Yep.
it's doing quite a bit. Okay, we'll take that route then. I guess that's how we're building this forward. It's funny because I told the person that proposed this, that's weird. Why are you doing that? You shouldn't inherit from the. But now I'm going back to it. So whoever you are, you know who you are. Thank you very much. Um, yeah, man. So this is how we can test this. So for a controller that has these cases, so you have source validation, source dependency exception with already exist exception, and then you have source dependency validation exception, which also returns this here qualifies for a theory, and these two here qualify for a theory as well. Do you guys agree? Like,
Yeah.
both of these are theories basically. So let's do that, right? Let's go here, and I'm gonna create a private public, actually public static theory. I said theory, and my iPhone thought I said Siri, and she said, "Huh?" So validation exceptions, right? And this guy will take in a var inner exception that we really don't care about, new exception like that, and then we can basically return new theory data with exception as well. But inside that guy, we have new source validation exception. So that's one. And the other one is new source dependency validation exception. That's two. So these are the two that we care about. And then inside each one of these, we want a message. And we can say here some message, right? We don't care, right? So I can go here and say string some message. This is even some inner exception. Because in this particular case, we only care about the whatchamacallit, you care about the categorical exception. So in this case, it doesn't matter, right? So I'll go back here and say private static string, create random string. There you go. AI is not going to let us write anything anymore. I can't write anything on my own anymore. Create random string. See, what I'm worried about is basically people saying, well, if there's no AI, I can't write anything. It usually knows the rest of the thought, right? But then again, that's what my parents used to tell me when I said, why can't I just use the calculator? And they would say, well, what if you don't have a calculator? You're not going to be walking around the street with a calculator in your pocket. Well, guess what?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm, I'm walking around with a supercomputer. I mean, this is a supercomputer compared to, the time back then. So here we are.
Yeah. An iPhone compared to an Etch-a-Sketch.
That's right. That's right. So some inner exception. There you go. So I can do that, and these are the two errors that actually return bad request. So I can actually sit here and say theory, and then I can say, what do you say, member data, and then name of. By the way, if you upgrade XUnit now, it'll blow up. There's a thing that I need to learn about XUnit. It tells you this doesn't work anymore. Try something else. So we need to find out what that something else look like. So exception, and then this is validation exception. Look how simpler this test is going to look like right now. So this is some validation exception. You could throw that away. You can throw all of that away, actually. And basically, you're just saying, give me this, the inner exception. Is that fair? And then we can basically put that here. And then this guy, if we run this guy, it'll all just work out just fine.
That looks far better.
It's much better, right?
Yep.
We can do the same thing about the 500 and then put one more test, and then we call it a day. We're done, right? Okay, so I'll put that here. I'll do Control KD just to clean things up, and then I'll go here and say this is a pass. This is weird because I'm writing the test after the fact, but that should never happen moving forward. Like if you're 211 compliant, you should write a test and then make the controller pass. It should never be like that. So here's another theory that I have, but in that case, it will return, instead of bad request, it will return internal server error on post of if server error occurred. So I'm not saying dependency or service, I'm saying server error, right? And I'm taking these two here because this is going to be the template that people use, right? There you go. And then I'm going to say as server exceptions. Shall I say service? It's not service. There's dependency and service. I'll say server. And then in here, it would be source dependency exception. And in here, it would be source service exception. There you go. Same thing, right? And then I can go here and say, well, for these server exceptions, everything should just be the same except that this guy will be internal object. What is it called? It's called, what is it called, guys? The code that comes back from internal, what's it called? Internal server error. Yeah, I'm not
Internal
wrong.
server error object result.
Server
Error object result.
error object. I know I had to rename that when I was building the, so I'm surprised because this guy is here, but this guy isn't. That's weird. Internal server area. I thought the same namespace would still be there. Interesting. Let's see if this guy passes. Oh, it did not pass. Let's see why. What's the error message? It's saying, I don't believe you. Something went wrong. It says the title exception. Oh, do you know why? Because with this internal, we don't read inner exception. We just need the categorical exception. So now it'll be happy. See, testing will show you things you're not paying attention to. That's the beauty of it, you know. There you go. That's a pass.
So Hassan, but on that question then, if we
Mm.
look at the controller,
Uh-huh.
I've still got a question. Why don't we do the inner exception on those last two?
Because
Because
in
our categorization is always for logging internal.
right,
But
because there's a reason for it. The reason is that the localized exception can tell you things happening internally in your server that you shouldn't share. And the customer won't be able to do anything about it. Like if you go, like if the inner exception bath configuration, for instance, or SQL connection is invalid, right? You don't want to tell your customer that. For one, they don't know what to do about it. For two, you're giving your hacker, a way to know how to kind of compromise your system. So that's the reason why. And none of that is documented in the standard, and I need to stop being lazy.
But yeah, I was wondering about that because that detail will be in your inner exception anyway.
What is this one here?
Yeah, because you throw validation, source validation exception, or does it
No.
not do that
Nope.
in RESTful sense? Does RESTful sense
No.
strip out the inner exception then?
Nope. RESTful sense doesn't touch the inner exception at all. Look, that's
Yeah,
the code inside of RESTful sense. Or at
yeah,
least
but what I mean then is you've still got your dependency tree on your exception. So even if you throw the categorical exception, your inner exception will still have the detail that you mentioned now.
it won't be extracted because look, if you look at the internal server implementation, it doesn't extract it.
Okay. Yeah.
Look at this method. Look at this method. Look at this method here. This is decompiled code, by the way. I know this is not my code because I would never put a return without an empty line before it, especially that it's a multi-liner. So that's decompiled. But look at I need to show you, like, where is the map exceptions? This guy. It doesn't touch. This is why we have to do that inner exception to have it look at the problem detail. Impossible. It will never give you that information unless you want it to, you know?
No, that makes sense. I was just wondering,
Yep.
because we mentioned so much in the previous video as well about
Yep.
logging and all that, and
Yep.
handling errors at the top of the stack.
Is that the end of the road though? Are we done here? What do you guys think?
I
Like
think we've got
I wrote 2
one.
tests, so that's 4,
We've got
right?
one more for the already
The duplicate,
exists.
the conflict, right? This one here. That one we didn't handle. Right? So let's handle that one. You know, let's go here real quick and say, well, here's a fact, right? And I'm going to go and say public. This is when the inner exception comes in actually useful. Like inner exception here will be very useful because in here I have to go and say, I'll show you, should return conflict, right, on post if duplicate if already exists source error occurred async. They're kind of different in their own right, right? Then that's when we basically go and say, well, this is different now because you have source, some source. So create random source here. And then I want to go here and say, already exists source exception. I love how this thing just is reading the description. So this should say already exists source error occurred or
So
whatever.
yeah, next question. Can we do get random string on that? Because it doesn't matter really.
It doesn't. It really
yeah.
doesn't.
Yeah, so
Also,
people don't have to go and copy what's in the foundation service. Yeah.
right. Also, this guy has some exception that needs to be thrown to it. So it's a little bit more complex as well. So this is, which I also don't care about. So exception, some exception, var, some exception equals new exception. So that's an exception that we don't care about, but we need to put in there. So that's some exception, inner exception, some exception, right? And then you said we want the message. So this is string, some message, create random string. Yeah, because it's not really important here, right? I will call this some inner exception for the inner. So the inner for the inner. And then the data here is null. We don't have any data. So I can leave this like null. There's no data there.
Would it not be good practice to do some inner exception.data, whether there's data or not?
Is that where this data is coming from? We could.
Yeah.
Some inner exception.data. I like it.
We do that because we localize the error. So we said in previous videos that when we localize, we need to bring the validation detail and the data dictionary one level up. Otherwise, you lose that.
Agreed. So this guy goes here, right? And then we can basically go and say, oh, well, you know, conflict object, expected conflict object. And then I'm basically just clicking enter for this guy because it's basically.
Yeah, if you just type the first letter and wait for 38 seconds, it'll fill it all in.
That's true. That's true. That's true. You know, if I get rid of these, like what's blocking it is that I'm adding more things. But what did you say? The first letter like this?
Yeah, like you're trying to train it and it'll say.
Yeah, I'm at this point. I'm just really just looking. Oh wow, that's wild. That's
You
just
just have
wild.
to give it. You have to give it enough time to go out and look, and
Yeah,
then come back.
I'm faster than it, Greg. I'm
Yeah,
faster than
yeah,
it.
yeah.
I'm beating this sucker. I'm telling you. So, and then we just have to kind of do like, you know, the normal. Yeah, how fun streaming is right now. Look, guys, I know how to hit enter and space. Look at that amazing skill set that I have. I hit enter. So that should work technically. It looks right to me. Christo, I don't know about you.
Yeah, looks
Greg,
good.
looks good.
Yes.
Let's run it. So that will be literally how we're gonna do, yeah, and it passed, right? Let's just
Mm.
poke at it for fun. Like if I go here and say, you know, I don't know, go back here to the actual controller, and instead of conflict, I'll return bad request again. Let's see that guy freak out. I mean, don't ever trust anything. Just question. Yeah, there you go. The guy is just freaking out.
Yeah,
And
Mm.
I've discovered that the statement in the Copilot of, you can't always just assume it's right,
yes,
and if you're not paying attention, you could be into a big pitfall.
absolutely 100%. That's what scares me more than anything. Like you will have a generation of software engineers that are heavily relying on this, and then what's going to happen is that like they don't have, but then again, that's exactly what the folks that were writing machine code and C code and low level, I witnessed throughout my lifetime. Someone says, oh, you're just going to end up with a bunch of engineers that don't know how to manage memory if you start writing Java and C sharp. And I was like, why do you care? He's like, well, your computer is nothing but memory. You need to manage that space, that resource that you have. And now we have, like, my computer literally has 200 gigs of RAM. I wish I could go back in time and show that guy how much RAM I have and how much I care less about maybe 30 kilobits of
Yeah,
RAM in there,
I
you
look
know?
at they named it Copilot, and I'm going like, what would you do if you were on a plane and you found out that there actually was no pilot? There's
It's
just
true.
a co-pilot.
It's true.
Where's the get pilot? So
It's true. Eugene says you can hit enter so easily or so easy on unit test. On real code, it's not so good, right? It's not so good either way. You have to at least just, I mean, on real code, Eugene, it will pretty much also suggest the things that I'm
mm,
trying to do. Like if I remove this whole code and go and say source added source equal, look, it's already suggesting what I should do, right? Because the standard now is so common and it's across multiple repositories that are public, it got gobbled up in that AI model.
yeah,
But what I say is, I'm not going to be like my parents. I'm not going to go and say, oh, don't use the calculator. Nobody, you have to do it in your head. I'm going to say, trust and verify, right? Just look at it. Okay, you could trust it a little bit, but verify that it's actually doing the thing that you think it's doing. Otherwise, it could lead you down the wrong path. Okay,
Mm.
gentlemen. I mean, this is a pass, and that would be our literally our. This is a piece of gold right here. Like I really
Mm.
appreciate that we are still continuing to push that wheel forward, right? So that would be medium controllers, medium controllers, add unit tests, right? I'm just gonna go and
Mm.
create that if it lets me. There you go. So we
So,
should have. Uh-huh.
so just to summarize the changes then, Hassan, we did this after the fact now, but for new people doing new PRs, we still want
Absolutely.
a failing and passing test.
Yes. And
Yeah.
and if that's the case, shut down the controller. Like basically shut down the PR. Like
Mm.
say this PR is invalid, right? We had some people, especially new ones. Greg probably saw this more than anyone, probably.
oh,
I don't know.
yep,
You'll
yep,
see new people coming in. Put aside the attitude, just for everyone to understand. If this community is teaching you really valuable things for free, so you have to show respect to the people that are trying to help you kick off your career, right? So put the attitude on the side. If you're not patient on the bitterness of ignorance for an hour, you're gonna deal with the sourness of ignorance for a lifetime, right? So maybe someone will give you feedback that's a little bit rough. That's definitely not Greg or Christo. But if I'm giving you feedback, or maybe Kay is giving you feedback, he's gonna write one line, one
Mm.
word, line, and that's it. That's all he's gonna give you.
yeah, yeah.
Greg,
I try to, like when I'm reviewing these guys' code, that I see the same things over and over and over again, and I get how they happen,
Mm-hmm.
but I also try to get them to, you know what? Go open up your PR and Git, push the period, and go review your own code and see
Yes.
what it's like.
Yes.
And you know what? You will see far more in that Git interface on reviewing code than
Than your own.
than
Yes.
what you overlook in your IDE.
Yes.
And, you know, it's like take that few extra minutes and you know what? Your PR is going to get pushed in quicker.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be happier. And, you know, we can go days and days and days. And then it's into weeks and weeks and weeks with these, oh, go fix this. Now go fix that. And,
Yeah.
you know, but, you know, it's like you said, one line and, you know, it's like fix it,
Yep.
Mm.
That,
you
yeah,
know.
Kylo doesn't negotiate. I saw how you review the pull request, Greg. I really appreciate. Same thing with Christo. You actually sit down and write down for the person, why the things the way they are. But people that review your code come from all different backgrounds. Some of them have the
Yeah.
patience, some don't. Um, but in general, yes. So Christo, Greg, that's the case. You see controllers, right? Controllers by default are just a major controller. They go from 5 points to 10 points just because we're doing these unit testing stuff. So almost the equivalent of a foundation service at this point in terms of weight from a Git file perspective. But what I want to add to this is that, if a controller from now onwards, if a controller doesn't have unit tests, is not test driven, it'll be shut down immediately, right? Because we're done doing that. We have to validate, and hopefully someone will come later with a case or something that we haven't covered in this scenario that we just kind of went through. I'm very confident this is all the scenarios that we probably, because we abandoned our controllers. Just make sure they're really stupid and thin. They don't do anything smart at
Mm.
all, right? No orchestration, nothing. It has one dependency and it's calling that dependency and handling the exceptions for it. That's all, right? So that should be more than enough. Um, for those watching, the repository and everything we built is out there in the open source space. I'll drop this in the comments. So if you're watching this stream, you can just click on that link and you'll find it. Um, Greg or Christo, please bless this PR with your review. Take one look. Maybe I forgot a tab there or made a typo. Well, I'm typing and I'm talking at the same time. Who knows what I'm writing in there? But I appreciate your time, both of you. Amazing
Okay.
work.
Mm. Good session. Thank you.
Yep.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.